Hello everybody and welcome to the channel. In today's video we have esteemed astrologers Carol Tebbs and Tamra McGilvray discussing house systems, an overview of the 6 most commonly used systems. If you'd like to let us know which house system or systems you prefer, please let us know in the comments below. And of course this is quite a contentious issue, so please keep the comments as respectful as possible. Coming up, we have our spring semester term. We have classes from beginner to intermediate to advanced, and we also have a number of fantastic workshops and webinars. So if you would like to learn more, please visit KeplerCollege.org. And without further ado, let's get into the video.
Well, first of all, I'm really excited to be working with Carol. Carol and I have done lots of webinars separately and teaching and all kinds of stuff. Carol and I have taught a couple of times together, but this is our first webinar together, Carol, and it's one of my favorite subjects, and I think it's one of yours too.
Well, it's important to our students.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to the community, to play with house systems, understand them a little deeper, and really get comfortable with them. And I think that's what we're going to try and do today. Now, we're not trying to convince anybody of going to one system or another. I'm not sure about Carol. I believe Carol uses several different types. I actually use several different types of house systems in my personal practice.
Most astrologers do. Most astrologers do, for various reasons. There are several reasons that Tamara and I are going to cover as to why there are so many different house systems. And I don't believe that there will ever be one that everybody agrees upon for those reasons. So we're going to make that clear and give a good overview.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Yeah, I believe the same thing. I don't think that we'll ever have one system. I don't think we should have one system. I think we should have many systems to play with and learn from and dive into. Can astrologers unify house systems in their practice? Really, that's what I've been working on, and I know many other people have been working on. Carol has dived into this as well. So that's what we're working on today. So the second slide that I had thought we were looking at here was looking at all of these different house systems. And we're going to talk a little bit about how many there are and which ones kind of fit where. I think you can't
count them. I think you cannot use all hands and toes, and there's more.
There is.
But there are half a dozen that are more commonly used that we're going to focus on.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's over 20 that are in actual use, that people are pulling up. And of course, the reason for that is because we have them on our computer and we can pull them up and play with them. And, we don't have to be with one system. We can explore, who developed these, why they developed them. Does the chart change? How does it change, and how can we use that? And I think that's why Rob was saying here that houses are one of the most problematical components of modern astrology, because I really think there isn't agreement with what house to use and what house system to use and when to use it. I think that we're getting better at that. At least we're getting better at the discussion of it, Carol.
Yes, and indeed there is long history. I mean, really, and not being specific, but we have approximately 5,000 years of astrology history. And indeed, house systems weren't part of the beginning. So evolved, as astrology evolved, there were certain the early people were looking at the sky. They weren't using, the tools that we have now, or even the tools that were created during the scientific revolution. And so there are several reasons why. I have 3 basic reasons why there are different house systems. One, we're going to talk about latitude problems. There are the new technology in the 17th century, 16th century, being, with telescopes and everything, getting better information. And then the traditions, certain interpretive systems, such as Hellenistic astrology, used a equal house, or excuse me, it would be whole signs. And so now Hellenistic astrologers use whole sign houses, even though they could use Placidus or Koch or other house systems. People tend to use the house system that tradition was created in. And indeed, there are other traditions out there. Modern astrologers prefer to use some of the more unequal house systems. So those three reasons are why there are different house systems.
Yeah, for sure. And I see that, like, I mean, here we often choose a house system based on teachers. I know that's how I first used a house system, was based on my teacher. And then I switched house systems when I went to a new teacher, because that teacher used a different house system than the one I originally started with.
Yeah.
So that's super common.
And the key point we're going to show you is that when you put the chart in a different house system, often the house cusps change and some planets may move to a different house.
Yeah.
Whoa, what do I do?
What do I do with that? Yeah, because it's a good question. We see we have a typo here. So for those who have their Virgoian eyeglasses on and see our typo, we'll fix that later. But just so that you know, we know it's
forgot
there.
the E in sidereal.
That's okay. So here's one for, I think, Carol. You have
Well, basically, the visual tells the story. Most of the civilization, the early peoples, were in the somewhere between 40 north and 40 south latitude. And so really there you don't have the distortion in the house cusp at those latitudes, the middle, plus minus from the equator. But when you get up, and you can see in the PowerPoint there, how the longitude lines converge at the poles, both North and South Pole. And the Babylonians, early Babylonians, hadn't yet mathematically figured out how to deal with that mathematically. And so consequently, the early charts that astrologers used were 30-degree. They were equal houses. In other words, every house was 30 degrees. And so that solved the problem.
Yes, and I think it's interesting, even with the complexity of our discussions with house systems today, in the early times, they were using an octoscope. So it had 8 houses instead of 12. So I really think this is something that is evolving. It's something to talk about. It's something to explore.
And indeed, you wonder, well, there are more constellations than just 12. Even early on, once they decided upon 12 houses, it was derived from the major 12 constellations, so that there was one for each house. And it evolved, and the 17th century, as Tamara's noticed here on the slide, there was a lot of scientific revolution in 16th and 17th century. And the mathematical tools and so forth were fine-tuned. Even timekeeping. I know birth time is something that we all are concerned about. But, certainly without birth time, you don't have, your houses are not delineated properly. And so really from that period, we've learned a lot since going forward. And I call, that's okay, keep it on this slide. I tell my students, BC in the astrology community is before computers.
Yeah, so true. I like that. Yes. So this was what Carol was talking about, that the houses, there's 12 houses. They describe where the planets express themselves. And the house system that we look at, I mean, of course, we're going to go into what doesn't change and what does change. That's later on in the presentation. But just to start off with, looking at, this structure that we're creating of where things are going to be expressed in our life. And well, here we are at the angles already, which is a great discussion, because that's really where it all starts.
And some of these slides are were not able to be changed because I were copying, pasting from my class PowerPoint, cobbling things together. But clearly in most of the unequal house systems, the angles, in other words, the midheaven and the ascendant, are in unequal house systems, the markers. But here you can compare whole sign to equal house. And the point here, these are the first level. In other words, they're simplest. Every house is 30 degrees. And so in the whole sign, it starts at 0 degrees of the rising sign. So you can see the ascendant is 7 degrees of Sag. And so that ascendant is somewhere in that first house from 0 to 30 degrees. Whereas in equal house, that's a very popular system, particularly in Britain. And here now, equal house is different. Every house is 30 degrees. However, the ascendant starts at the ascendant. And so you can see that first house is 7 degrees, starting 7 degrees Sag. And then the next house starts at 7 degrees Capricorn and 7 degrees Aquarius and so forth. And so if this person happened to be Elizabeth Taylor, we're not delineating her chart, but if there were a planet at, let's say, 3 degrees Sag, it would be back in the 12th house, in equal house. In whole sign, if everything that is in Sag would be in Sagittarius. The same way here in Pisces, everything that's in Pisces would be in that house, the 4th house for this person. But if you notice here in the equal house compared to the other side, the Mars, Sun, Mercury are in the 4th house, but the node moves into the 5th house. So the equal house, and you might want to chime in on this, Tamara, from where you live, equal house is very popular in the northern or the southern latitudes above 45 north or 45 south. Tamara, you tell them where you live.
Yes, because I'm in Canada, and even for other astrologers across Canada, some are even higher than I am, but we do get lots of clients that are way up in the northern areas, and it squishes everything together to a point where it just doesn't make sense to read it. It doesn't make sense, that everything is squished, that the 12, you get 12,
You're referring,
11, 10, 9. Yeah,
you're referring
houses.
to the unequal house systems.
Exactly. So we use this equal house system in those cases because it gives us, it sort of spreads things out, lets us have a look at where everything is really landing in a way that can make sense to the client. So equal house system is very popular in northern Canada.
And a whole sign?
Whole sign, well, of course, whole sign is very popular now. Absolutely. Lots and lots of us are using it. I mean, lots of us are around the world are using it now. So I think equal probably isn't as popular. I think whole sign really has shot to the forefront on the equal house systems over equal. Mhm.
the interest nowadays in Hellenistic and traditional astrology after
Yeah.
the translation of the ancient texts at the turn of the 21st century.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's what we're going to explore a little bit. Of course, here we've talked about this, the kaleidoscope of house systems. There's over 20 house systems to use. That's because of computers. We would never sit here and calculate 20 house systems by hand,
No,
but a click of the
No.
button, and there you go, you can see what's going on. So we love that. And, there are three main house divisions, types of house divisions that you can look at. And those are some of the things we're going to explore here. Of course, the house calculation, there's math behind the madness here. And this house system is a calculation that includes the rotation of the Earth on its axis and the division of the ecliptical plane with the great circles. Of course, we're not going to really get into the math today, but we wanted to mention that there is great math. And Carol, that's what blows my mind about these ancient astrologers. They were so advanced in their math skills. It just blows my mind how advanced they were. Like we think we're all that, but really they were all that back then. We're just following on their coattails. Amazing. There are several methods of calculating house systems, and we're going to go over a few of those. And all house systems in Western astrology use the 12 houses projected onto the ecliptic. And we have to mention, this is one of the most important things. If you are into that, or you are into, working on diploma or, furthering your understanding, it is so great to understand the math behind the madness, house calculation. We have a math calculation class here, a couple of them actually at Kepler. And the astronomy, like what does it mean when you look at this 2D piece of paper, and how does that translate to the sky, or the other way around? How does me looking out there and seeing Jupiter and Venus conjunction, how does that translate onto my 2D piece of paper? Because there is math. It isn't exact. What you see is what you get on the piece of paper. There's some mad math behind that, and understanding that mad math, I think, makes you a better astrologer. How about you, Carol?
Absolutely. And indeed, so many of us live in cities and, the lights are on all night. For instance, if you live in Las Vegas, Nevada, the lights are on 24/7 and it's hard to see the sky. And we need to spend some time outside looking at the sky, even the moon. So many people don't even watch the moon, what phase it's in. Just look out the window.
Yeah. Connect with it.
Yeah.
I think it just makes it more tangible, more real, that what you're practicing is a part of who we are. It's not just this piece of paper that somebody, printed out from the computer. It really has a lot of meaning behind it. And I think these classes really help with that understanding. So what I wanted to do here, this is just one example. We're not going to go through all of the house systems. I just wanted to show you that there is this correlation between how this circle is divided and how you begin to see these houses, listed on your 2D piece of paper. So you can see that on these two ends, they're mirror images of each other, and these two ends, they're mirror images of each other. And that's because they are, the quadrants are divided equally by 3 to form these intermediate cusps. And this is something that we're going to talk about. Carol teaches movement, chart movement prediction. And this is one of the things that I think is important for that, to understand that these house cusps are different in different house systems, and how you pick the one that you're going to use will largely depend on, like for Canadians, where, does this chart work? Is it all crunched up where it makes some of the northern charts, you don't even get this nice little threesome here. They're all so bunched up together, you can't even make sense of it. So you have to find a system that works not only for you, but works for your client as well. But I just thought we would bring up this one slide that shows the oldest system of quadrant house styles, which is Porphyry. And that doesn't mean that it's not used today just because it's the oldest. In fact, I believe that Plutonian, I think it was Jeff Green that still used Porphyry house systems in his work. Yeah, they're still all in use. So they're still all really super relevant. Oh, look at this guy.
Yeah. There are slides that are not all straight in order. There will be space throughout the PowerPoint. But the main thing about this slide is that all of your house systems fit into 3 of the different categories. So simplest, and again, those are still in use, but they're the earliest. And indeed, they divide the ecliptic directly. And so whole sign, solar house, 0 Aries, equal house are all, every house is 30 degrees. Now you get into the unequal houses, I think in the 16th century, and within that period, maybe a little bit earlier. We're not doing specific history, but the unequal houses have been around for a long time. But they project their divisions onto the ecliptic from divisions of another great circle. And so here there are a lot of them, and these are associated with not only the scientific advances in viewing our sky and the telescope and all of those scientific advances, and astrologers were playing then with their new tools to see if they can get something that works for, their area that they're working in. So it was testing. And indeed, a lot of these traditions that grew up in the Renaissance, traditional astrology, they still use the Regimentanus and Campanus, some of these other I know the primary directions, a lot of people who do that in movement use the Marinus. Again, the people who were astrologers and testing these new systems stuck with it. And indeed, in modern astrology, if you're going to do traditional astrology, everybody's using Regimentana. So sticking with the tradition is one reason. Unequal houses, there are other kind that divide the arc of a moving point. Now, these are the technique, the house systems that a lot of the modern astrologers use. And indeed, Alcabitius goes back to the 13th century. So that's pretty early. But Placidus and Koch, it's a matter of choice who you learned from. Now, your Europeans, particularly Germany, and definitely Koch. And then there are other people and America like Placidus. They are different. And what you will see is, yes, the intermediate houses do change, and you have to make a choice.
And I think what's really interesting, Carol, is that when we say modern, Placidus it's 17th century, but they think it came from even earlier, probably around the 13th century, that he really didn't invent it, that he was taking information from earlier and devising a more solid system, I guess, that everybody wanted to use. So he became known as the creator of it in the 17th century. But really, we're talking about, ancient times here, 1300s. So
and these people were not united by Zoom like we are.
No, not at all. No, absolutely not. Just in their own little groups. And the printing press, that's really what popularized some of these, because there'd be an astrologer that, did all the tables for one particular type of astrology. That's what was printed, and you got what you got, unless you were going to do all those calculations yourself. So we say modern, but in reality, this is a very ancient system unto itself. Thinking of modern times, we think modern, we think, oh, somebody invented it 10, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, maybe. No, this stuff was invented a long time ago. We haven't found anything that's better than what was invented at that time. So I think that stands true there. It stands the test of time.
Yes, Geoffrey Chaucer, the Canterbury Tales, was an astrologer, also even wrote a book on astrology. But even in the Canterbury Tales, there are a couple of tales in there that are so descriptive about what happened, and the sun was, different. Anyway, an astrologer could create a chart out of the descriptions that he gives in the Canterbury Tales, written in the 13th century.
Exactly. So when we say modern, we're talking ancient modern, not yesterday. Absolutely. So here is just taking a look at, we're going to look at a couple of charts here for Jack, and looking at the different descriptions and how the houses went out for him. We'll continue to dive a little deeper into this, but this is sort of our first peek at it with Jack's chart here.
Okay, and again, this is a slide from the PowerPoint that I use in class. So we'll have 5 different house systems looking at Jack's chart, and what we can see change. For instance, for students, I have circled the moon Saturn because here they are at 29 degrees. And so in other house systems, those could change to a different house. The Jupiter Pluto, it may not change either, depends on the different house system that I tested in. So I started here with whole sign. So 0, his rising sign is Leo. And so obviously the first house begins with 0 of Leo. And notice around the outside, every sign is noted there, all 12 signs, and they all start at 0. Yeah. All the way around. And certainly that's a pretty easy system. Now you see the word interception in the center, and as we get to other slides with Jack Nicholson's chart there, I will talk about interception more specifically.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because again, this gives another layer. So we're looking at a chart that's very clean. There isn't any interceptions. There's no there's no muddling up of houses, squishing them together. This is giving you a nice, broad, clean look at it. And there's a couple of things that are really interesting. We can always see that the midheaven floats across the top in whole sign, which of course the IC also floats across the bottom. So I think that it's, and then like you said, this ascendant, depending on where the ascendant is, when you start working in other house systems, it can shift a lot of different planets into different places.
Yes,
but
and
this is a nice clean look.
Yeah, in the type 3 charts that we're going to look at, the ascendant and the midheaven are the markers for the beginning of the 10th house, the beginning of the first house. But here you can see in whole sign, the midheaven is in his 9th house.
Exactly. Yeah, midheaven right up here in the 9th. It's, because remember that the angles are different than the house cusps. And that's something that we need to remember. The angles never change. They will always be the degrees that they're at. Here's the ascendant and descendant at 1 degree, Leo and Aquarius, and the midheaven and the IC are Aries and Libra at 17 degrees. That never changes. It doesn't matter what house system you use.
Well, there is one or two in there, but
Yeah.
they're not used very
No.
often. Now, this is his chart into equal house. Now, not much has changed here because in equal house, the ascendant is the beginning of the first house. In the previous slide, remember the ascendant was a degree 43 minutes into Leo from 0 rising. And so, but for instance, it gets complicated for you people who use equal house or play or learn equal house. If somebody has a 29 degree Leo ascendant, the ascendant would be 29 Leo. The second house would be 29 Virgo. Third house, 29 Libra, 29 Scorpio, and so forth. And so really it would move all of the planets basically into a whole nother house. Now you'd say, well, why would you do that? I tell students, interpret the chart with what you see. You don't have to turn everything back into whole sign. It is a choice, and I tell students, find out, you have choices to make. What regularly works best, and stick with it. Even then, all of us astrologers use 2 or 3 different house systems, and we're getting to that. In this case, Jupiter, Pluto didn't change houses, nor did the moon, Saturn. But you can see now the moon is further away. It's another 1.5 degrees away from the house cusp, where it was closer before in whole signs. Again, we're not in interception yet.
Nope, no interceptions. Here we are. Now we've switched guys, but
Doesn't matter
doesn't
who.
like looking at, doesn't matter who it is. Here we've got equal house system, and you've got Regiomontanus. So you can sort of see this comparison. And this is what I'm talking about with the houses bunching up. Now his are not too bad. I mean, I've seen them worse than this. This is pretty tight though. You've got these huge, massive houses, and then you've got these little skinny houses where, where you're trying to make everything happen. So I think that's, again, it shows where you live is a big factor in what kind of house system you might want to use for that
I'm
client.
looking at these, something's wrong here. And apparently it's because you don't have the software that I used to create the slide. That's okay.
I think so. You know what? I noticed it on one and I didn't notice it on this one. So folks, that's my fault for not, my eyes must have glazed right over this. I didn't use my Virgo glasses. I just glazed right over.
But the key point here, is in an unequal house system. Remember, Regiomontanus was, I told you there are 3 categories. This is the second category. Regiomontanus is an unequal house system. And here in Scotland, above 45 degrees north, here's what happens to some houses. And indeed, very far north, beyond Scotland, you might even lose, a house might vanish. It gets so extreme. And so these unequal house systems tend not to work at higher latitudes, either north or south. So just the visual here, we're not interpreting chart. The key here is the visual. And so clearly that's one of our first reasons of the first 3 that I said, is the area of the world that you were born in or the client is born in. Way north, the unequal house systems don't work very well.
And here's exactly what you're talking about, the skewing, the intercepting, two signs. I think this is really interesting too. I think this is one of the most interesting part of this skewing that can happen, where you have two signs ruling four houses. I think that's, really, I think it's something that, first of all, we can glean a little bit of information from, if we're layering our information and looking at what kind of changes happen, what that might mean to the client. Of course, you need to have the client there to be talking to them about how that might be playing out in their life. But I think it's really super interesting that, four houses are ruled by two signs, and the condition of the condition of those rulers, and how much access do they have to their essential nature? I mean, there's just so many things that can happen when you start looking at that. This is the original astrology that I learned when I first, intercepted houses were really big, probably because I also live in Canada. So we're really looking at these things because you can really get some skewed houses happening up here.
Yeah, and Chris McCrae has
Chris
had a book out on it. It was during the 20th century, it was a big deal.
Yes.
In the 21st century, astrologers are not paying so much attention to interception. Let me talk about this example. This is still Sean Connery's chart. And you can see it in this first house, Capricorn rising, no planets in the first house. Here you see the sign Aquarius. But wait a minute, the second house begins with Pisces. And so Aquarius is skipped over. In other words, Aquarius doesn't rule any house. I mean, the sign Aquarius. And if you're using Saturn as the descriptor of Aquarius, fine. If you want the modern ruler, Uranus, fine. But the idea is that it's skipped over. Now let's skip over here to the other side because they come in a pair. If you look at Leo, so here it's saying the seventh house starts at Cancer. And so here you go up to Leo. There's the eighth house doesn't start until Virgo. So Leo is skipped over. Leo doesn't rule any house. The sun does not rule any house. Now here's a world famous actor. And his sun is an identity and expression is kind of blocked. Anything that is intercepted was interpreted as having another hurdle to express outwardly. It was kind of a debility. And I'm saying, are you kidding me? For Sean Connery, that he has this interception that blocks him to express? Give me a break. The same thing in Elizabeth Taylor's chart, famous woman of the 20th century, and that she's blocked from expressing her identity. So the interception does cause problems. I think there's on the internet, you can find all sorts of disagreement about that.
So when I was learning interceptions, what we would look at is, in his case, I would question, I don't remember his wife. Was she in the public? Was she suppressed in some way? Did he keep her hidden? Like, did he hide her away because he didn't want, because his home life was his home life, his partner was his partner, and he didn't want to share her with the world. Maybe that's how. Yeah, maybe that's how. And plus, the sort of this thing about the sun in the seventh, being hidden, that identity. So I don't know. I would kind of play with that, explore that.
The wife that he married and was attracted to is because when he met her, she didn't know who he was.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. There you go. Oh my gosh. She didn't know who he was. And
he was impressed by that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, there's things to explore here. I still think it's a really interesting concept, and I like to explore it. So that's great.
Yes, but now you get to another situation. If you have interception of a sign, sign, so the ruler of that sign is blocked.
Mhm.
Now, if you look at the Gemini Sag, here
Mhm.
you go. Now, so Gemini, or see here, Taurus, and so you have Gemini getting to rule 2 houses.
Yeah.
Well, now, and indeed, Mercury, ruler of Gemini, gets to rule Virgo also. So, I mean, Mercury gets to rule a heck of a lot if you're using this. So there are just rationale that you have to think through and realize that it's very different than whole sign.
Yes.
And
yes. And you can't use whole sign rules. I think that's the thing that we need to even express, is that you cannot take rules from one and apply them to something else. It's like, keep the rules within its own system, because whole sign rules, I think, just don't apply to these types of houses, to intercepted houses, and, you know, where it's, you know, you've got all this ruler ruling 2 houses and then no ruler for, you know, 2 sections of the chart. So that's, I think, a really important point, is that make sure that when you're following rules, you follow them in the system that they were developed, and try not to blur those lines. And I think you're much more successful in your astrology when you do that.
yes, and in the chat, I can see people talking. Yes, the interpretation is different.
Yes. Yep.
So you
we're
don't
back to
switch
Jack.
house. Yeah, that's fine. You don't have to switch house systems just for fun, unless you're testing something. But now back to Jack Nicholson for a moment. In this case, you have the Regimentanus. That's an unequal house system. In his case, it doesn't make a huge amount of difference, because you can see that the houses are approximately 30 degrees. Some of them, 25 or so. It's not the extreme, but look at his latitude. He's born at 40 north. So it's not extreme there. So you're not going to see a huge difference in the middle latitudes of our globe. But clearly, in any unequal house system, you can have intercepted houses. So how do you decide if you're looking for intercepted houses? You're going to start with, I always start with the ascendant. So Leo rules a sign, rules a house. But look here at the second house line. It's Leo. Second house in Regimentanus is also Leo. And obviously the same would be true to Aquarius. So Aquarius and Leo get to rule 2 houses. That means something else, 2 other signs get intercepted. But they're intercepted differently than might be in Placidus or other of the unequal house systems. So the issue is, if you're a traditional astrologer, William Lilly type, probably you're going to use either Campanus or Regimentanus, because that's what the tradition was built in. I tell students, use your house system according to what tradition, where it began. That doesn't mean you can't change, but it's a good idea to stick with the tradition.
So
Back to
now
Jack
we're,
Nicholson.
still with Jack, and we're with Placidus. And
Now-
again, Placidus interceptions occur in Placidus, the same thing.
Now this falls into the type 3. This system totally falls apart at higher latitudes. Certainly it's very popular. And astrologers don't flip around that much, because usually we're in a certain location and we see our clients. I was astrologer in Southern California, and my clients were Southern Californians. Now that we're on Zoom, we have clients all around the world.
Mhm.
So as astrologers, we need to pay attention to where is their latitude of birth. And maybe I love Placidus, but maybe I'm not going to use it. I don't know why my light goes, it's not changing here as I'm sitting before me, but it brightens and dims as I speak.
You're just shining your light brighter in moments. That's all.
I don't know why, but you people
Yeah.
who are astrologers realize that you will have clients all around the world,
Yes.
and you need to pay attention to what house system you use, because it might be unreadable
Yes.
if the person's at an extreme latitude.
Absolutely. And of course, having more than one system that you're well versed in is going to help you with that problem. So making sure that you know all the rules associated with it, understanding what interceptions are if you're going to use a quadrant-based system and have clients in the north or the south. But if your
So-
clients are all, across the equator, you're going to be fine.
Yeah, well, there's some questions that I see on the chat there. What system would, for a global clientele? I wouldn't
Mhm.
use one house system for a global clientele. I would look at the latitude, and I would probably use either whole sign or equal house if somebody were above 45 north or 45 south latitude, because it begins to skew there. Maybe 50 if you want to do 50 north to 50 south. You can use any of these. I want to compare between this one, Coke, and then the previous slide. We'll look at this one first,
Mhm.
the Jack Nicholson. Now, I'm looking to see if anything changed houses in other, in my course. I use this same Jack Nicholson throughout the 12 system that I show the students, and these Moon Saturn pair and the Jupiter Pluto pair do change houses. But the point I want to make here, let's look at Coke and Placidus are very similar. Of course, the angles are the same, but the intermediate houses are greatly different. For instance, in Coke, you see in the second house, you see Neptune in Virgo in his chart. But now if you go back to Placidus,
Mhm.
now this Neptune 16 degrees Virgo, right on the third house cusp.
Mhm.
Now, as an astrologer, I mean, here's a performing artist. I mean, which am I going to pick? I'm going to pick Placidus, because that really describes what he does.
Yeah.
And again, that's an arbitrary choice, but you can see why astrologers stick with a house system.
Yeah, it all depends on what your clientele, what you find works well and consistently. And having more than one house system in your pocket, I think is a good idea.
Mhm.
We have a whole bunch of questions here, but just on the topic where you're at, there's a couple of people that would like you to explain interceptions a little more.
Oh, let's go
could.
back. Well, we can look at this one. Okay, interceptions. Let's see. Interception can occur. So let's start out with, here you can see on the first house, Leo. And you can see on the second house, 26 Leo. So here you can see Leo on two houses. That means the sun rules two houses. And you
Mhm.
know that there is a direct opposite that is also Aquarius on the 7th house and Aquarius on the 8th house. So you know when you have a sign repeated, getting to rule more than one house, that sign is more than, there's two Leo houses and two Aquarius houses. That means that you're going to have two houses that are, the sign is skipped over. Now, in this place, it's easy to see. Here, you can see that the 10th house is in Coke. is Aries. And Aries, there's no Taurus that gets to rule a house. So Venus gets robbed from ruling all of these Taurus planets here. So Venus is Venus itself. It is in the sign Aries. So Venus is not trapped because it's in Aries. But the Sun, Uranus, and Mercury in Taurus are kind of trapped here because the next house, the 11th house, is Gemini.
So what they say on that is that those planets may be a little more difficult to access. So it doesn't mean they can't access them. Of course, everybody has skilled and unskilled and, lots of factors that come into play, but that energy might be a little more suppressed, especially the planets that are in there, not just that Venus rules them and she doesn't have access to them. So she's, trying to help out these planets that she is ruling over, and she is going to struggle to do so. She's going to struggle to get in there and uncover because they're kind of suppressed. So that's how we look at it.
Suppressed. Think of it as a debility. Interception is like a debility.
Yeah.
Now, again, for one of the great actors of the 20th century, you go, what debility? And the same thing with Elizabeth Taylor's chart. I mean, give me a break. I mean, they're some of the most famous actors and actresses of the 20th century. And so then you get the signs that get here, that get to, here's Libra. And the next one is Sag. So here's, okay, so the Leo and the Aquarius got to rule 2 houses, and here the Taurus that we were just talking about, Scorpio, the same thing.
Yeah.
It gets skipped over.
Yeah.
Now, does that answer the question, do you think?
Yes, thank you very much. There's a couple
Great.
people that were asking. Thanks.
Okay.
Great. Perfect.
Now, Taylor Swift, 0 Aries, and if you, let me see on Taylor Swift, looking at my notes here.
So we don't have a birth time for her.
Right,
And
I'm looking,
yeah.
I'm moving, I have to move my toolbar here so I can see what it says. Okay, we don't have a birth time for her.
Yeah.
And
so what do we do? It doesn't mean we can't do a chart for them. It means that we have to use other house systems, and we have other house systems that we can use that, in reality, we've got this as a solar house system, and that's because it's showing us how she's projecting her light, how she's projecting the sun, her identity. But you can use this kind of house system for you could put the moon on there we really don't know where her moon is. That's the problem with not having a birth time. And at 1 degree, it's a very shaky moon for us. As astrologers, we're not sure where that moon's going to fall. But if we wanted to put Jupiter on the ascendant to see kind of opportunities and her growth and wisdom and, things that are going to come to her that way, you could also do that. So I like this type of house system. It's like a derivative planetary type of house system. And I really like it to use it for people that do not have. I like this one more than 0 Aries when I am working with a client that has no clue about their birth time. What about you, Carol?
Yeah. Yes, I use either one, but I do like the sun on the ascendant. Key thing though, and around the world, like in Japan, they don't record birth time. There are many countries around the world that you will have clients who do not have a birth time. 24-hour search is difficult. But you can do some delineation. The planets are not going to change.
That's right.
In 24 hours, noticeably.
Except for the moon. Yeah.
Except for the moon. I want to make a big point here.
Yeah.
if you're doing one of these sun on the ascendant charts, it's an artificial chart, and or the 0 Aries to start, be sure you set the birth time for noon. The reason you want to set it for noon is because the moon's going to move, let's say 13 to 15 degrees a day. If you pick noon at whatever location the person is born in, if you pick it for noon, the moon is not going to be off more than plus or minus 6 degrees. And you could be
Yeah.
closer than that even. But
Yeah.
if you do at 0, at 0 a.m., it could be off as much as 15 degrees. So
Yeah.
we use these. So clients around the world now, you can do, because planets to planets, you could still talk about this stellium in the first house with all that Capricorn. And the key thing is not just those outer planets, you have Mercury there. And you have a personal planet involved in that grouping. So now it's very important. So there's a lot of delineation that we can do even without a birth time. Tamara, in this,
Sorry.
not the 0 Aries there,
Yeah.
I don't think we can say that, oh, all of those planets are now 10th house. The
No.
houses, it's artificial, so don't be delineating. I don't, at least, and I want your opinion on that. I don't delineate all of those planets as first house.
No, and I think that's why I prefer the sun on the ascendant rather than this, because you still can use a house backdrop, but it's in relationship to the sun. It's not in relationship to the birth time. Whereas this gives you no structure at all. It's just purely planetary delineation. In my humble opinion, anyways, that's how I use it. Yeah,
I agree. And the key thing to remember is if you don't have birth time, you don't have houses. I mean, you can't put planets in houses and delineate them as if they are expressing the nature of that house.
Of the structure of house systems. Absolutely. So let's just dig a little deeper now that we've kind of looked at them and sort of seen how many choices we have. I just wanted to take a little bit of a deeper look at what things are the same. So what can we always count on? We can always count on the weight found in element and mode being identical throughout all house systems. The hemisphere distribution throughout all all house systems, because it's based on the angles. Chart patterns, you're going to have chart patterns throughout all house systems, and the patterns is going to remain the same. And I see I have a typo there as well. That's my fault. Dispositor patterns, you see them, in the moment, right? But not when you're typing them out. Aspects are the same, angles are the same, degrees of the planets are the same. So you have lots of stuff to work with that you figure out first before you even need to get into your house system. Then we have choosing the right house system. And what we've talked a lot about that already. So it really is going to be based on where you're practicing, where you're locating your clients, and what type of astrology is practiced. I think that there's, like, for instance, I do a lot of astrocartography and I do local space. So I use a particular house system that matches where that system was developed. The person who developed that system, they've done a lot more investigation than I have in why they chose that house system. Hopefully, I know that they did. So, that's something that is going to be personal as well. I mean, you may prefer one over the other because you really have an easier time delineating it. That might be another reason why you use it. Many house systems fall apart, like we've talked about.
Yeah.
So can you blend techniques, Carol? This is where we really want to get into, does it provide a deeper level of understanding? So when I get a client, am I spending too much time on house systems, or should I just stick with one? I think this is something that's really interesting to explore. Again, for me, in blending house systems, we must keep the integrity of the technique. Don't try to use, ancient techniques on a modern system or a modern this is probably even more sacrilegious, doing a modern system into an ancient house system. I think that you just can't do that. It doesn't work as well.
Hellenistic astrologers aren't using Placidus.
No,
for
exactly. So I know that we can stop for some questions here before we get into, I just did a little tiny bit of a blending. Actually, what I was doing was, I wanted to look at, does it matter that we have these intermediary house cusp systems when we're doing chart movement? And because Carol is here, I think that's a really good discussion. So before we get into that, we probably should open up for some questions, and then get into kind of like more detail if we have time.
Well, before you switch over,
Yeah.
Planets are everything. And
Yes.
the house cusps are very secondary. Planets are it.
And the angles,
Yes.
there's nothing matches. And when I was doing a bit of research on trying to find these hits on secondary house cusps, when you see the big events in someone's life, does it really happen on a second house cusp? No, it happens on an angle. Those are the ones that matter. And I think that's what we have to remember when we're picking these house systems for secondary chart angles, like the second house, the third house, the fifth, the sixth, and so on, that it's not as much of a big deal, because where the big hits happen in your life are either planet to planet or angle.
Absolutely. Angles,
Yeah.
angles. And
Angles. Yeah.
Intermediate house cusps. Nah.
Exactly. But I think that for me, when a client comes and says, oh, am I going to have any money issues, in the next little while? Or should I do this with my money or something like that? I do want to have a good sense of a house cusp on the second house. I don't want to use a whole sign system, because it doesn't work for me to try and really talk to them. I mean, you can, but maybe I'm old school. Maybe I just still depend on those intermediary house cusps. But anyways, do we have some questions before we move?
Yes.
There's
we have
Lori.
a few questions. Yes, I'm going to feed you some of the questions.
Okay.
We have from Janice, and I'm guessing others have the same question. If you could talk a bit about the meaning of the MC and the 10th house, or the angles when we have the floating, like in the whole sign house system, and the MC floats.
Oops. Sorry, I went one too many. There we go. We'll just have a chart to look at so that we can. Oh, I don't think I have midheaven in this. So let's go back to a chart that has a midheaven in it. Oh, back we go. Come on. So here we have one. So Carol, did you want to start the conversation on this one?
Here, the midheaven is not written in there, but you can see the red box around it. It's 17 Aries. Whoop.
Oh, we can go right back. There we go.
Okay.
We've got one right here. So here we've got a midheaven in the 9th house. And we have a 10th house cusp at 1 Taurus.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
Well, in the unequal house systems, all of I said there are 2 tiers. The simplest, the 1 level, the 2 and the 3 levels are all unequal house systems. And the 10th and the 4th and the 1st and the 7th are marked by the angles, the ascendant, descendant, and the midheaven IC. So in all of those unequal house systems, okay, you're moving on, but that's okay. In all of the unequal house systems, the midheaven and the
I just went back to Jack's chart for
okay,
you.
but those mark the beginning of the 10th house. The midheaven is the marker that starts the 10th house. The
Yeah.
IC is the marker that is the beginning of the 4th house. The ascendant is the marker of the beginning of the 1st house. And the descendant is marked by that degree of the descendant.
Yeah.
Now, when you put it in whole sign or equal house, it can move. Even the ascendant can move.
But the ascendant and descendant is still always found in the 1st and the 7th. I think where
Yeah.
it's super interesting is the midheaven IC, because they really float across the top and the bottom.
They can even go into the 12th house at extreme places.
Yeah. The king to be, my mind just went blank. King to be, not the king
Charles?
that's in there, not Charles,
Oh.
the next one up. His midheaven is deep in the 12th house. What's his name?
Yeah.
William?
It's
Are you
Kate.
talking about
William, that's it.
Prince William.
So William's midheaven is deep in the 12th house. That's how skewed these midheaven and IC can be. So what do you think, Carol, on what that adds to your delineation? I'll let you go first.
Well, in whole sign, for instance, it would an equal house as well. It suggests a kind of a service emphasis, serving the community, of giving it a 12th house interpretation. What sign that is in, I don't know, but that ruler of that sign would add detail to it. But I think it would be, giving his dedication to serving his constituency.
Well, like Carol, for Jack, we have his midheaven in the 9th house. Do you think that would have something to do with the foreign
9th house
sort of
issues?
Yeah, well, foreign issues, 9th house issues, but the midheaven in the 9th would sort of elevate that idea that there's some level of his connection to foreign affairs or foreign, a foreign group, people that are following him on a foreign level. I mean, he is, of all actors, he is one of the most worldwide of an actor. He's not just, a US actor. Do you think that's how that might play out?
And ruled by Aries, I mean, it just related to his work.
Yeah.
And Aries Mars, related to what you do, what your work is. So I'm sure he's filmed in every country.
Yeah.
Around the world.
Yeah. Or even done films in those countries, in the different countries. Thinking of, how many films has he done? It's amazing. He's got an amazing career. And so for me, the difference is exactly like that. The midheaven might tell us a highlight about something that he's super talented in, that he's going to share with the world. Or the 10th versus the 10th house, which for me is purely about career. It's not whether you're talented at something, not that you have something to give or offer the world, which I think is midheaven. The 10th house is just purely career, or, the most external part of your persona. Is that what you use the 10th versus the midheaven for as well? Yeah. Yeah. And then for for below the horizon, I always think that it's interesting with the IC, showing up here, it would be in the 3rd house. So, perhaps he really is rooted to his community. I don't know what kind of community work Jack has done. Do you know anything about his community? Writing, does he
Well,
do
he's
write,
at
like,
he's at every Lakers basketball game.
is he?
Oh, yes. Great
So
fan.
he's a great community.
You'll
fan
always see him at a
sport.
Lakers game.
True, that's true. He gets in trouble sometimes in those Laker games, for sure. For sure. So yeah, the IC, I would look for, some sort of anchor into, if it's the third house, the fourth house, the
Oh.
fifth house, as opposed to the fourth house cusp, which is really your roots and your clan, which isn't necessarily where you've adapted your neighborhood. I don't live anywhere near my clan. But this is my neighborhood. This is, I've adapted myself to this neighborhood. So I think that's how I kind of play that out. Or, it could be somebody producing a lot of books or literature, or, maybe, I don't know if he's got a talk show. So, looking at where is he anchoring himself, across the bottom of himself as
I
well.
see chats. Peter, hello, Peter. Been a long time since I've seen some of these people. But Annie was saying that he has a Danish daughter.
Oh, so ninth house,
Yeah.
Danish daughter. Yeah. So that's obviously, foreign affairs.
Yeah. Yes.
Foreign affairs.
I'm sure he's been
Absolutely.
around.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much. We have a lot of questions, so I'm going to throw out another one to you.
Go ahead.
What about the 5-degree rule? Is that for all of the different quadrant systems, or is that for particular systems? Will you maybe speak to that?
I'm talking, the orbs deal with aspects. Now, in terms of a house cusp, Rob Hand says that within 3 degrees, plus or minus, there's no clear dividing line between the houses. It's a kind of a gradual, he tends to blend the two houses. Like if there's a planet within 3 degrees of between the first house and second house, he would interpret first house, second house blended. It's not agreed by all astrologers, but Rob Hand says he blended them. House cusps, basically, they're not a major point of your interpretation. Certainly the house ruler does give information to the planets, but the actual degree of the beginning of the house cusp. Zip Dobbins used to say, because I asked her at one point that similar question, and I said, well, what if somebody had a planet on each house cusp? And she said, well, really, your house cusps are a porthole to the outer world. And if there is a planet on a house cusp, I would say partile or within 1 degree, or that planet becomes more prominent as it's able to express to the world more easily. It's out there.
For me, I use that rule about whether or not a planet can get sucked into the next house would be more so on the angles. I agree that these secondary, because it really can change so easily based on house system. So for me, the angles have that power to suck something towards itself, and it's really creates meaning. But when it comes to these house cusps, like for instance, this one here is so close. You've got that 29-degree moon, and then your next house cusp is at 1 degree. In some house systems, that's probably that moon might even be in the third house as opposed to in the first. I mean, we'd have to look at it.
Yes,
but
and Rob Hand would interpret second and third.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I like that idea, because it does give that, that issue of which house system are you using, where it's going to stick.
But Zip Dobbins would say, now that moon really would jump out prominently
Mm.
into the world of third house issues. And the same way
Yeah.
with Saturn. I don't know whether he has restrictions internationally or not, but he's a
Yeah,
bad boy, so
probably.
it could
You
happen.
never know. Exactly.
All
Yeah.
right. Next question. If you
Yeah.
have a client and they're in the extreme polar regions where the sun doesn't rise and or set, how do you
Yes.
determine ascendant? How does that work?
Well, the house, the structure, the angles will still be there, but you need to use an equal house system to get any meaning out of the chart itself. You just can't read a house like that on Placidus, a chart like that with Placidus.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say anybody above 50 north or 50 south latitudes,
Yeah,
really you're best to use equal
Some
house or
sort of
whole
equal.
signs.
equal or whole sign, yeah.
Mhm.
And now at this stage of the game, I use more whole sign than I do equal. So I would naturally, because I look at whole sign along with Placidus in every reading. So I actually already do that.
Yeah. I think as astrologers, we get our eyes trained to a certain thing. I like to see the angles. And so I prefer
Mhm.
Placidus, even though my students like whole sign. And so I switch back and forth between them. But in my work, I like to see the ascendant and the descendant on the red line across. And I like to see the midheaven and the IC marked
On the line. Yeah.
prominently because they're so important.
Yeah.
Okay.
Question?
Anything
Yeah,
else?
there's still quite a few. I don't know if you I know we're kind of at our time. Are you available to answer a couple more questions before
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
There's one specifically on the value of rectification if there's no time of birth.
Oh, Carol, you send
Oh,
them to
my
Carol.
goodness.
That's what you send them to Carol. You say, I know the best rectifier in the world is Carol Tebbs.
Well, yes. Now, most astrologers, if the birth time is rounded off or something, they can adjust, a degree plus or minus on the angles and get the chart to work. First of all, every astrologer should test the chart with a new client and really just by asking a couple of questions. For instance, when I first went to an astrologer, she didn't know anything but my birth data, but she asked me 3 questions, and what she was doing, I now understand, she was just mentally math solar arc, counting the degrees from my midheaven to the next planet. And why did she pick the midheaven? Well, I have some planets up there. If the planets are clustered around the ascendant, well, you can count from there. But she simply counted from the midheaven to my moon, 7 degrees, 7.5 degrees. And she asked me a question related to my mother and, was I needing care or something? I said, yeah, I had my tonsils out. And same way she just counted, 1, 2, 3, 4, the number of degrees, equal years, to ask me another question it's just by solar arc, without using computer or doing calculations by hand, just mental math. And I guess she asked me a second and a third question, arcing that midheaven to different planets. She was simply testing if my chart works. Now, I always do similar test of whatever I see in a client's chart to know if their chart works. If it doesn't, and if 3 questions and that happened when I was 9, or that happened a year later. And if I get 2 or 3 answers, no, that happened a year later. I go, oh, I need to adjust the birth time by 4 minutes, because 4 minutes of plot time equals 1 degree on the angles. plus or minus.
I think, Carol, that this is a lead in to the fact that you also teach a rectification class at
Yes.
Kepler.
5
and I
weeks
think-
starting May 27th.
Yeah. And you know what, Carol, I have to say, I mean, I've taken that class from you. I've read your book extensively, book cover to cover. I really think that it's an important thing for an astrologer to know, because when you can rectify a chart or understand the process of rectifying a chart, you really understand movement. And until you rectify, I don't know that you really get that deep into movement, other than, oh, this planet hits this and this
Yeah.
planet hits that. But rectification really hits home on, is this a real working chart? And
Yeah.
Carol, you're a wonderful teacher on rectification. So you fill Carol's class up this summer for her and have lots of fun in chart rectification.
Yeah.
The one thing that I will say, that most astrologers will be able to adjust the chart with just your normal software, you know, Solar Fire or Astro Gold or Sirius or whatever you have. Because, you know, if you're just adjusting the chart a degree or two plus or minus, that's, you know, a range of maybe 8 minutes plus or minus. Most astrologers do that. I do tell students this, that if you will have clients from around the world that they know approximately their time. You know, well, I know it was after breakfast, but it was before lunch. So it was, you know, so here you're dealing with 3 hours of time.
Mm-hmm.
That's a bit of work, and that does take rectification. What I tell those people, those astrologers, you're not going to make a living doing rectification. It's hard work, and it doesn't, you know, there's a limit to what we can charge clients. But the key is, if you do a good rectification, you'll have a client for life, guaranteed.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
So if you are living in one of the polar regions, in terms of calculation, I think maybe that was the actual question from the one before about calculating charts. Could the computers do that for you, or is there a special way of calculating a chart if you're in a polar region?
Computer does
No,
it.
computer does it for everybody. Yes.
Okay.
Every place on Earth, there's not a place on Earth that it doesn't produce a chart for.
But clearly I recommend at the higher latitudes, use equal house or whole sign.
Okay, great. There was a question about how the ancient astrologers could do birth charts without clocks.
They had a sundial.
Yeah, they did.
I mean, they could tell
Absolutely.
time. It wasn't as precise as we have now. But they they were amazing. We're
They were
perpetually
incredible
surprised.
mathematicians. They were incredible mathematicians. Like I said before, it blows me away at the mathematical skill and philosophical wherewithal these guys and gals had in their day.
Mhm.
You know, we think we're modern, we think we're so far ahead, but you know, really.
There's a question about the topocentric house system. Do either of you want to comment on that house system? Like how
Carol, have
you
you ever used it?
No, I don't. That's not commonly used. It's not one of the more popular ones, but
It's a recently developed one.
yeah.
It's a modern system, and I don't know that it has been tested rigorously. I'm not quite sure. I don't know anyone who uses it personally. I have played with it. I've looked at it. I haven't found a huge difference in, you know, it's not like a mind-blowing
Mhm.
new chart or anything. So I think it's not something that I personally use. So I can't really
Mhm.
talk about it in depth. But, you know, it is something that perhaps some people out there want to do some testing on if they
Yeah.
think it's an
Yeah.
interesting house system.
I think you're best to pick the house system that works for you. But even if you use one house system most of the time, there will be
Mhm.
times that you're going to have to use the sun rising artificial chart because the person doesn't have a birth time. You can
Mhm.
still do
Yeah.
quite a bit of delineation with just the planets.
Oh yeah, I never back down from someone who doesn't have an accurate birth time.
Right.
And even if they're really iffy, like if they come and they're like, oh, well, I'm not sure, it was in the morning sometime, then I'll immediately go to sun on ascendant. I don't fool around with that. I mean, I know lots of people have
Yeah.
many different ways of determining what time they're going to use, but I like to, if it's a client that I'm going to see again, and I want to really work with that client, then I'm going to start simple in the beginning, sun on the ascendant, and then we're going to start to work on maybe some rectification, maybe some, some deeper looks at how can we really give this a solid structure to the chart.
With software, we have the options to just click a key and see it in more than one house system. For instance, I use Placidus regularly, but I like to see in whole sign, where does the midheaven go? It gives me extra bit of information. That's all.
A little deeper. Yeah.
Yeah. And kind of along those lines, we've had a few people asking just more help, like for when you have multiple houses with one sign, one planetary ruler, just how to blend that or how to interpret that.
Tamara?
So what are they asking? Multiple houses
So if
with
a
one
house
ruler?
has, 2, 3, or 4 different houses that they intercepted, when
Yes.
1, 2, or 3 houses that are all under one sign, one ruler, how to go about interpreting the meaning out of that.
I think that's pretty, well, for me, maybe Carol wants to tackle it, but I think it's a pretty deep subject. I think that's kind of a webinar onto itself. I don't know.
Well,
it is pretty deep.
You're going to look at what's the ruler of that sign, what planet is the ruler. And certainly if it's Mercury and you have 4 different houses that are, you have the Gemini, and then you have the other houses that are intercepted or double that. It's
I
just
think
simply
it's
the
complex.
ruler, the planetary ruler is dominant.
Yeah.
Okay. And
Is that
sorry,
I'm just smiling at the chat box. So says I see the names of so many people I haven't seen or talked to for years.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
There's a question, and I think you might have touched on this already, but I'm going to ask again just in case you didn't. For specifically, they were looking at the charts of Sean Connery and Elizabeth Taylor, who had, I think, intercepted houses, and that if they moved, they relocated, would they continue to be blocked? Because I believe that was the terminology that was used.
Certainly relocation, you have a new chart for the relocated. It's the same birth time, but the birth time is the planets are exactly the same sign, degree, and minute. The only thing that changes is the outer wheel, because in the new location you have a different rising sign. So you have totally, the planets move to different houses. And so in that location, those planets, maybe that's a good question. In fact, relocation can unlock some of those planets that have, I call intercepting, kind of the same thing like a debility. But in a new location, those planets can be in a house that's not intercepted. Good question.
And this is an interesting question. Actually, 2 people asked this. Is there a way to know what type of house system was used if there's a chart example and the astrologer doesn't list which house system they're using?
Well, you can tell by looking at around the outside. First of all, are all of the houses 30 degrees? Well, you know that they use either whole sign or equal house. If there are unequal, and first of all, I can't imagine an astrologer today putting out a book or an article where the house system was
Wasn't
not
listed.
identified. That's just
Yeah.
not done nowadays. But to answer the question, so I can tell by looking, if it's an unequal house system, I'm going to see the midheaven and the IC marking the 10th house, the 4th house, and I'm going to see the ascendant descendant marking the 1st and the 7th house. But it doesn't tell me the difference that whether it's Regiomontanus, is it Placidus, is it Coke? I wouldn't know, but I can tell by where the midheaven, where the angles are.
Okay. And Carol, there's a question about your book and your course. So they want to know how long is your rectification course, and
It's 5 weeks, and rectification, actually it does have a part B that's another 5 weeks, but basically all of the tools you have in the first 5 weeks. It's the it's twice a year. It's in the spring term, and it's the latter part, 5 weeks, the last 5 weeks of the spring term. So it starts May 27th. Certainly you would register before then. But in that 5 weeks, we do rectification up to, let's say, a 3-hour range. 24-hour range is the same techniques. It's just a lot more work. But that said, welcome.
and your book, do you have a new?
The book is in the Kepler store. And indeed, I just started proofreading it. I put it together quickly for the last class in 2022. And it's good. It's only in digital format. It's going to publication by AFA in hard copy, but it's not out until later this year. The digital copy is in the KeplerCollege store. But there are a few typos in it that I'm working on to fix, but it's in good shape. But I found a few and I thought, oh my heavens, gotta correct those.
Thank you, Carol. And this one is probably for you, Tamara. Which house system is most used by the Vedic in Indian astrology?
Oh my gosh, no, I cannot answer that question. Lahari is, I think, one of the more common ones, but no, I cannot answer that question.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, I don't know. I'm not a Vedic astrologer or Indian astrologer that they go by now. Is there anybody? Well, I know that there are people here in the chat who are Vedic astrologers who know that answer.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Someone knows the answer to that, please pop that in the chat box.
Yeah.
I think it might be Lahari, but I could be totally wrong.
Yeah.
Lahari-
Well, but see, they do sidereal astrology rather
Yeah, they
than
do.
tropical. That's
They're
the
using
difference.
they're using a whole sign house system in Lahari
Yep.
Ayanamsha most popularly, I believe.
That's what I was thinking,
Right.
Donna.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the key
Thanks,
difference
Donna.
is sidereal versus tropical.
Okay. And what do you two use? Because I'm sure everybody has a different answer to this, but the question is, what constitutes birth time? First cry, breath, head emergence?
Oh, that question is like how many angels can dance on the head of a pin? That go to any group of astrologers and there would be diversity all over. The problem with birth time is the doctors and the nurses, birth time, nobody cares except the mother, and she's under anesthetic. They're caring for the mother and the baby. Birth time is way down the list for those people.
Well, it is, but if anyone knows me and they're having a baby, they know that I have instructed their partner to have a stop clock. First breath for me, but I will
Yes,
take a birth
first
certificate,
breath.
first breath, but I mean, I'll take a birth certificate time, and use that. So
Yeah.
it's just, if you have a choice, that would
Yeah.
be my choice, but
Yeah. The stop clock out there.
Yeah, they're instructed. I go over the instructions before they head in.
Okay. I think we've covered most of the questions, and thank you so much. This has just been incredible and enlightening. Is there any kind of last offerings of information you want to share before we wrap up today?
I'm so happy.
No, I mean, I will be doing a local space class in the summer. I believe it's scheduled. I have to talk to Donna. And that's for the those